Thank you. I absolutely apologise for my absence last Sunday. I don't know who that idiot was that stand at the pulpit, and the police are still chasing him because I tell you what, I have been well for so long, and about 10 days ago I was hit like a steamroller, and I shouldn't have come up here and spoken, but it was too late to get something else. So anyway, we're here still, but I'm waiting on Jesus to come immediately. All right. Now listen, I was, in my convalescence, I was fortunate to come across a 14-year-old message by John MacArthur, and I do highly regard John for his scholarship, not necessarily as Calvinism, but I excuse him for that. And in the last few years, he really softened on that area, but this was one that was really interesting, and he was preaching on the last generation, because there's so much confusion about who is the last generation, the people who will see all of these things. And this happened in the Passion Week up to the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And he taught and taught and taught the disciples the same things, and they just didn't get it. And they said, well, what be the signs of your coming, and what will this happen, and what this happen? And it was really fascinating, because I have always and never resiled from telling you what the Bible says, not what the Bible you want to say. Do you understand? And I can remember several years ago in Billabong, and we were going through Revelation. We got to Revelation 20, and I was talking about the first resurrection. And to a man, if you get all of these people somewhere on anywhere in the world on YouTube, and they'll say, well, listen, the first resurrection starts at the end of Revelation 20 verse 4, and the rest of the people are sinners doomed to the lake of fire. And they couldn't be more wrong. All right? And I'll show you if I've got time to the end of this particular thing. So I said, no, the resurrection. I mean, even Daniel, 600 years before Jesus, actually recorded that the first and second resurrections happens at the same time. And it's in Daniel chapter 12. And if we've got time to get there, I'll explain it to you. And so John was, even back in these days, was mourning the fact that when he and other pastors like him were going to conference after conference after conference after conference, and when they looked at the programs, his heart fell, because there wasn't a single message from any speaker at these conferences about the return of Jesus to this earth. And it's like there has to be some kind of virus that has got into Christianity, and they want it to just continue as things are, right? And it's not going to continue as the way things are. And so John said he really hammers on eschatology. And he said, you know, we read all of these things in the Gospels, and we read the narratives and the dialectic arguments between Jesus and the Pharisees and all the rest of it. And he says, but the problem is when people get to learn that there's going to be preaching on eschatology, they shut down. They don't want to know. You're a different kind of church, I have to admit. and I'm a different kind of person because what John said, what is the point of listening to 3/4 of the story and then you see the end coming and you don't want to hear it, all right? And so what is the point? And he said, and John says, do all of these pastors think that Jesus gets it wrong at the very end? It's as good as gold for the first 3/4 and then he's mucked it up. And this is what, when human nature and human desire directs the theology of a church, you might as well shut it down. Because I go from the Bible and I'm going to shock you today. I hope you've got sedatives and all the rest of it in your purses. The first and second resurrection, and then we had this thing about I forgot about it, and it really upset people. And I said, well, if you don't agree with me, and this goes for you guys, if you don't agree me, please come with the Bible and show me where I'm wrong. And in 20 years, no one can do it. Do you see what I mean? And they said, and do you know what their backstory is? But Pastor so-and-so says this. I don't care which pastor, anyone, YouTube hero, whatever. And I am just absolutely shaking my head because it's like they don't properly read Scripture. And I do. And I dig and I dig and I dig. And I'm going to reference the Passion Week that leads up to the crucifixion and the resurrection, which is the greatest story that any human being has ever heard. And so I'm going to enjoy this. Pity there's a camera not up here to see your faces when I break it open. Now listen, the whole week of Passion Week was inaugurated by Jesus when the Israelites were still in Egypt as serfs and slaves and whatever have you. But in Exodus 12, 1-7, this is Jesus speaking to Moses and Aaron, all right, before they left Egypt. And the verse says in chapter 12, verse 1, now the Lord, which is Jesus, spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, verse 2, this month shall be the beginning of months. Now this is Nisan, Nisan. So the Jewish people have two calendars. One is Rosh Hashanah, and this one, Pesach. And so Pesach, we sort of have it close to Easter, but and sometimes it hits it bang on. But this month shall be the beginning of your months, and it shall be the first month of the year to you. All right? So speak to all of the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, Nisan, every man shall take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father. All right? Now, a lamb for the household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, then let him and his neighbour next to his house take it according to the number of the persons. And you could have one lamb and sacrifice it for 10 people. So you could join two households and one lamb would be excusable. And so listen to this. In verse 4, and if the household is too small for the lamb, join together. In verse 5 here, and your lamb will be without blemish. In other parts of the Torah, it says that you take the lamb into your house for this time and you examine it for purity. And so you have to have this lamb in your house for examination to make sure it's perfectly useful for the Passover ceremony. And so now in verse 6, your lamb shall be without blemish. It's been to be investigated. A male of the first year. And you may take it from the sheep or from the goats, preferably a sheep. And verse 6, now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, right? So it starts on the 10th of the month and it ends on the 14th of the month. So how many days is that? How many? Hey? Did you go to school? Arithmetic. Listen, round at Billabong, everyone said 4, 10 plus 4 equals 14. No, it's not. 10, 11, 12, 13. How many days? 5. Right. And that was on the orders of Jesus too. And then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. Do you see the pattern? And they, in verse 7, and they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses, so the uprights and the lintel across the top, and where they eat it. And Jesus then carries on and says, when I pass over and I see the blood, then the destroyer will not kill the first of the family in the houses. And so leading up, and it's very interesting with Passover, because Josephus records that between 30 AD and 33 AD, in that decade around there, Josephus records that there were 260,000 lambs slaughtered on the 14th of Nisan. Can you imagine the mess? And that is there for you and I to understand what our sin in all of humanity has caused, that kind of mess. And so they were actually slaughtered, which meant by Josephus's reckoning, there has to be 2.6 million people visiting Jerusalem for the Passover. And I looked at earlier records and it wasn't quite that big. But the problem is everyone had learnt in the Eastern Roman Empire about this guy called Jesus. And they were all fascinated about him because some people say, is he the Messiah or is he a fraud and all the rest of it. And by the way, the leadership don't like him, so we don't know what to do and all the rest of it. But there was this en masse gathering in Jerusalem in these particular years. And leading up to the subject of Passion Week, listen to this. I was most pleased to listen to John MacArthur get the Passion Week in its correct setting. And he boldly said to his congregation, and I wish they had a camera on the congregation and not on John, but he said this. He boldly stated that the entrance into Jerusalem by Jesus was on Monday. How many of you ever celebrated Palm Sunday? It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. I don't care if you love it, you've enjoyed it, whatever. It's not in the Bible. And I'll tell you why, and we'll go right through this thing here and now. He said, this is what John said, it started on Monday. And Monday was nothing but a fraudulent mockery of the anointing of Jesus as king. And the leadership had already rejected Jesus' claims to messiahship based on their assessment of Jesus in chapter 12 of Matthew being empowered by Satan. And this Monday is the start of the week leading up to Passover on Friday, because that's where you get your 5 days. 10 Monday, 11 Tuesday, 12 Wednesday, 13 Thursday, Friday 14, the 14th of Nisan. And John called it Palm Monday, and that really was like electric shocks, because I had never ever understood what Palm Sunday was. And you have to jiggle around the arithmetic to try and get the entrance into Jerusalem on a Sunday. You just don't get it. And I just want to read you, if it's Monday, and it is, and I invite you to tell me wrong, the whole day that led up to the entrance into Jerusalem on a donkey, it started very, very, very early in the morning of Monday. And the interesting thing is that Jesus and his disciples had been east of the Jordan River for safety, because the Sanhedrin had spies everywhere in Judea and in the Galilee trying to find where Jesus was. And they had no authority on the east of the Jordan. So that's where Jesus and the disciples were there for quite some time. Now let me just read this out of the scripture. And it's Mark 10 starting on 32. So early in the morning, they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was going before them, and they were amazed. This is the disciples. And as they followed, look at the next 3 words, they were afraid. Why would the disciples be afraid? Because they've been safe on the east side of the Jordan, they've crossed the Jordan, and they're heading towards Jericho. They're in enemy territory as far as they're concerned. And they were afraid. Then he took the 12 aside again and began to tell them the things that would happen to him. Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles. And listen to this. Look how specific Jesus is, what's going to happen to him in a week's time. And they will deliver him to the Gentiles, and they will mock him and scourge him and spit on him and kill him. And on the 3rd day he will rise again. And so that's what they're doing. And at the end of the day, they were going towards Jericho. And this is why they were afraid, because they were afraid of spies letting the Sanhedrin know that Jesus is coming. And so having crossed the Jordan and got to Jericho, Jesus, talk about grace and mercy. You know, he's heading to the most powerful message that God can give humanity by sending his son down as a perfect Passover Lamb that takes away the sin of the world. And he stopped. And do you remember that little story about Zacchaeus, the dwarf tax collector, who was so small he had to get up into the chair, and Jesus said, up into the tree, and Jesus says, come down, and he got saved. And then as he was leaving Jericho, a blind man called Bartimaeus called out to him on the Monday, and the year that most worthy modern scholars have even got scientists, geologists and cosmologists into this understanding, and have accepted for Passover to be on a Friday, it had to be only in 30 or 33 AD. In that decade, those were the only two years where the 14th of Nisan was on Friday. And it had to be on Friday because the Feast of Unleavened Bread that lasts for 7 days happens on the Friday afternoon just before 6:30 and the crossover into the Sabbath. And so it also has to be on the third day, the Feast of First Fruits, when Jesus rose from the temple. And you can't have it any other way. And I had arguments with Chuck Missler personally. I said, why do you think of it? It's a Thursday crucifixion. And he said, well, he worked back for the time that he was up there in Bethany. And I said, no. I said, you've got to understand that there's the 10th and the 14th. That was inaugurated by Jesus. You can't change it, all right? If you're trying to manipulate things to suit your idea of when it should be, then you're going to get it wrong. And so it had to be either 30 and 33 AD. Those are the only 2 years in that decade that had to be. And I say this, sorry, Sir Robert Anderson, but your calculation is dead wrong. He came out with, I think, April 10, 32 AD. It was never that. And he should have asked a rabbi for a start. And the tradition of Palm Sunday did not appear until the 4th century in Jerusalem. There was no such thing as Palm Sunday until the 4th century in Jerusalem itself, where the existing church that was built up there, and it was mainly Gentile, they were freed now from the persecution from Rome under Emperor Theodosius in 380 AD at the Edict of Thessalonica. And so Theodosius was the second emperor after Constantine. Everyone thinks that Constantine made Christianity the formal religion of the Roman emperor. It did not. He released an edict of tolerance. So you, instead of persecuting Jesus, you could tolerate Jesus. And so Constantine at least did that, and then Theodosius. That's the worst thing that has ever happened to Christianity, because every pagan temple in the Roman Empire became a Christian church, and every rotten priest became a minister of the word. And nothing has ever been fixed by that. And if you look at the theology all the way through, it is absolutely disgraceful. And so there's another little passage I want you to read here. So they came to Jericho, and he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude. Blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat on the road begging, and when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Then many warned him to be quiet, but he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. So this poor guy was acknowledging Jesus as the Messiah of Israel, the Son of David. And so Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. And they called the blind man, saying to him, be of good cheer, rise, he is calling you. And so this guy came over, and throwing aside his garment, he rose and came to Jesus. And so Jesus answered and said to him, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Bartimaeus said to him, Rabboni, meaning my teacher, that I may receive my sight. And Jesus said, go your way, your faith has made you well. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. Now, because of the salvation of Zacchaeus and the healing, and in fact, there's one of the other Gospels that record there were 2 blind men in Jericho, and Jesus healed both of them and restored their sight. And Mark only records Bartimaeus. And I want to just read this as well because you won't get it. Now, when they drew near Jerusalem to Bethphage and Bethany, they were going up the hill to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is on Mount Zion, Mount of Olives. And he sent 2 of his disciples. And he said to them, go into the village opposite you, and that's Bethphage. And as soon as you have entered it, you will find a colt tied on which no one has sat. Loose it and bring it. And if anyone says this to you, why are you doing this? Say, the Lord has need of it. This is what he told the disciples to say. And immediately this owner of this colt will send it here. And verse 4, so they went their way and found the colt tied by the door outside on the street, and they loosed it. But some of those who were standing by said to them, what are you doing loosing the colt? And they spoke to them just as Jesus had commanded. Wouldn't it be great if we all did what Jesus told us to do? My life would be wonderful. But anyway, and so what are you doing loosing the colt? And they spoke to them just as Jesus had commanded. So they let them take the colt. And it's just amazing. So then, I'm going to go back to verse 6. And they spoke to them just as Jesus had commanded. So they let them go, and they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their clothes on it, and he sat on it. And many spread their clothes on the road, and others cut down leafy branches, palm branches, from the trees and spread them out on the road. Then those who went before and those who followed cried out, saying, Hosanna. Now it's Hosanna, it's save us, save us. And they wanted to be saved from the Romans. And so he wasn't going to do that. In fact, John MacArthur had a rather pithy statement. He said they wanted Jesus to save Israel, and he said, no, if only they knew about 70 AD, the total and utter destruction of the nation of Israel. So, and they're all crying out to him, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Baruch atah b'shem Adonai. And verse 10, blessed is the kingdom of our father David that comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest. And we know that it was a donkey because Zechariah 9:9 has this, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, shout, O daughter of Jerusalem, behold your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. And so he returned after that tumultuous procession down into Jerusalem. And he had started very early in the day on the east of the Jordan, crossed the Jordan, crossed the plain of Jericho, went into Jericho, saved Zacchaeus, and healed Bartimaeus, and went up the hill, got the colt, and went down into within the gates of Jerusalem, and they hailed him as the Messiah. Now, he returned to Bethany, and he was probably, but there's no guarantee, but was probably with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, because they were in Bethany. And you know, it's a fascinating thing. The other little non-entity of a little hamlet called Bethphage, And the interesting thing is that I'm going to show you Mark 11:12-19, what Jesus did on the Tuesday. He went on his way and he tore strips of people in the temple. But before that, there's just so much irony in the Bible, because the name of the little hamlet called Bethpage, it's translated the house of unripe figs. Isn't that apropos for the whole situation? Bethpage is the house of unripe figs. And it's there for this next paragraph. And Mark 11:12-19. Now the next day, this is Tuesday, when they had come out from Bethany, he was hungry. And verse 13, and seeing from afar a fig tree having leaves, he went to see if perhaps he would find something on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs, so the tree should not have been covered in leafy green leaves, because the figs come in June, and that was at least a month away. But Jesus dragged the disciples in there, and it was like he was looking for a fig, but he wasn't. He knew very well that it wasn't. And he said, in verse 14, in response, Jesus said to the tree, all right, why would you speak to a tree? Because it's a metaphor for the nation of Israel. And in verse 14, Jesus says this, let no one eat fruit from you ever again. That's profound. If you look at the 2,000-year history of Israel, there was no fruit for at least 2,000 years. And then May 14th, 1948, and there was an ingathering of Jews from all over the world, but there is no fruit there. There are some Messianic Jews there. And when we had Amir Safadi over with us, I actually asked him, and I think he's put it on one of his messages. He said at that time, because he came to our place in 2018, he sat down and we had a chat. We had to get to know each other and that sort of thing. I'd barely known what his ministry was. And I said, so how many believing Jews are in Israel? And this was back in 2017. And he said, Stuart, he said, there is 7 million Jews in Israel, and the total number of believing Jews is 1%. There are 70,000 believing Jews in 2017, and there's 99% who don't. And I better be very careful what I say. My auditor is at the back, and she's not feeling well. But it's so hard. It is so hard to raise the subject of Jesus with Jewish people. And you have to be anointed, and you have to have the right time and all the rest of it. And, the funny thing is, my wife has been adopted basically by them. And they'll say, when Sue is within the group there, they say, oh, you're just one of us, which is a very unusual thing for a whole bunch of Jewish people to call a Gentile, especially a Gentile woman. So she's been in that facility for probably 25 years, and so they trust her, and she's accepted into their quarters. And so he cursed the fruit tree, because when he came to Israel there was no genuine faith in God at all until he had arisen and just built up a believing entourage. And you know, even in John 12, there's, I think it's around about 52. Don't quote me, but it says that there are many of the rabbis who believe in him, but they stay silent because of fear of the Jews. And remember the guy that Jesus healed, blind from birth, and he was taken down to the pool of Siloam, which is down the hill where the city of David was. And he was told to wash the mud off his eyes, and he got his sight back. And the whole point of that is that only one who will listen to me will be saved. Do you understand? Because you can't have nationality, ethnicity, and good behaviour to get you through the gate to heaven. Do you understand? There's only one door to heaven, and it's through Jesus. And it's through a relationship with Jesus. And so the approach to the fig tree on the top of the Mount of Olives, after he had cursed it, going down into Jerusalem, was for the condemnation of the nation as a whole, for being guilty of religious fruitlessness and hypocrisy. Jesus, now, and by the way, what do you think of the current state of the Christian church around the world, especially in the Western Hemisphere? Would you blame Jesus if he said the same thing about the modern church? You can't even get people to open a Bible on the pulpit. They give their opinions. They give what they would think that you would want to hear. I mean, your tickled ears, that's not going to get you to heaven. A relationship, a real relationship with Jesus will get you to heaven. And that's the only thing. And I'll expand on that next Sunday. And so Jesus knew that the figs would not be available on that tree for another month, but the tree had produced branches full of leaves, but no fruit. Even worse, they had, as a nation, rejected their Messiah, for whom they had waited from the return from exile in Babylon. Having cursed the fig tree, Jesus travels to Jerusalem to deal with the temple. And so in verse 15, this is on the Tuesday, Jesus cleanses the temple. Can you guys put up the schematic? No. The one that you did. That's it there. You see that? Monday 10, Jesus enters Jerusalem, inspected as the Passover Lamb. Tuesday, Nisan 11, the temple confrontations and parables and teaching on the Mount of Olives. And Wednesday, it's a quieter day, possibly in rest with Bethany. And Judas takes off and does a deal with the Pharisees to betray Jesus when it's opportune. And poor old Judas Iscariot. In John 17, Jesus himself calls him a son of perdition. And you don't ever want to be called a son of perdition. There are only two human beings in all of history who have been called the sons of perdition, right? Judas Iscariot and the Antichrist. What a good pair. What a good pair. That man had been in the entourage for 3.5 years, holding the purse, flogging from it too, and had seen the miracles. He had heard the teaching. He saw his character, the way that the people loved him and he loved them. And he just thought, no, I'm going to do a deal with the Pharisees, make a few bob, and Jesus just has to cop it. So he's the son of perdition. And so they came to Jerusalem, and then Jesus went into the temple and began to drive out those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And the outer court, the court of the Gentiles, who proselytized to Judaism, is where the commerce took place. Can you put the temple, if you don't mind? That's it. That's a schematic of the court of Gentiles. Do you see the high walls behind that? Only the Gentiles are only allowed in this wide area called the court of Gentiles, and they can't get through that, because if you go through the east gate, they go into the court of the women, and that's where everyone can gather, children, women, men. But there's another gate that goes into the court of the Israelites, and only Israeli men is allowed to go into that court, and they have to stand with their backs against the inside of the wall. And in there is the laver and the altar of sacrifice, and that's where, I can't believe it. I don't know how they did it. How did they butcher 260,000 lambs? It must have been unbelievable. And so this is what happens. Now, this is the thing that Jesus really gets angry at all of the people that are associated with the temple. Do you see the holy and holy place and holy of holies in the background in the height? You know, that's 15 stories high. It's 15 stories high. And when Jesus said to them, after he left the temple, and the disciples were so worried about him, they said, "But Lord, look at the temple. What a great edifice." And he said, "This I tell you, a time is coming where not one stone will remain upon another." 15 stories? I mean, I don't know how many people were killed building that thing. I mean, the stones, the blocks that they used to build that, I've got no idea how they would have launched them up level by level by level. But it was one of the great edifices of the ancient world. And so there were money changers in the outer court. That's where the Gentiles were. But also in the outer court of the Gentiles, they had a real brilliant business going. The priesthood had a lock on the acceptable animal sacrifice fraud. And I'll tell you what that was. Because some schmuck from up in the Galilee might have had this beautifully reared lamb, and it's in perfect condition, and they put it on a string, and they were all the way down to Jerusalem. And he gets to the court of the Gentiles where the priests are, and this poor guy says, "This is a perfectly spotless lamb, and I want to sacrifice it for my family," or whatever's happened in his life. And they say, "Nah, no good. We'll take it, and you have to buy one of ours." And you know, out in Bethlehem, in the cave where Jesus was born, not in a basement, never in the basement. There was never swaddling clothes in a basement. And so they had all of the shepherds out there in their pay to raise up all of these lambs for sale for the temple, and you couldn't get around it. The priesthood had a lock on it, and they always refused an animal brought to the temple for sacrifice, and the poor guy had to pay an exorbitant process for a priest-approved animal. And there were money changers in the court. Oh, that's a dag. In the court, there to exchange foreign money for the temple tax. You couldn't pay your temple tax, that's your poll tax, in foreign money. So they had these money changers there, and you know what's going to happen. And the temple tax to be paid in a half shekel coin, and there was a substantial fee added to the cost. Do you understand? It's just wrought after wrought after wrought. Why do you think he cursed the fig tree? Why he took the temple and made it into a business? Have you seen some people on social media trying to do the same thing with churches? It's disgraceful. Absolutely and utterly. We look at this and say, oh, those terrible Jews, there's blah, blah, blah. Look at how many, I love that guy Gino Jennings. I don't know where he is. I think he could be either in Jamaica or in South Africa. But he is one powerful preacher. He can go over the top sometimes. I'd like to put a few of his little short ones up there. But he said he thunders with his huge congregation about pastors becoming millionaires and multi-millionaires and living in mansions. And he said, that ain't no pastor, that there is a crook. Who Jesus, in his whole ministry, had enough supplied by the Father. And I saw this one guy that Gino Jennings was really criticising. And this guy, and he was sort of very similar to Gino, and he said, he walked around and he said to his congregation after the tithe had been counted, he said, I've locked the doors. I've locked the doors, and no one's getting out until we pass the plates around again. Is he a Christian? Is he a Christian or is he a thief? Oh, dear God. Dear Lord. And only Mark mentions the selling of turtle doves, the least acceptable animal sacrifice for the poorest of Jewish adherents. If you had nothing else, you could spend a couple of pennies and buy 2 turtle doves to take to the temple and offer them as an offering for sacrifice. And they would look all down at them. Well, what did Joseph and Mary take to the temple after 40 days? 2 turtle doves. Because they were dirt poor. Do you understand? They had come down from Nazareth on a donkey. Mary was almost ready to give birth, went to the cave, had the baby. The angels came round, the shepherds came around. I mean, the shepherds would never go into Bethlehem. Why? Because they were considered so unclean and so low in the social strata that they could not flood into any hamlet. And so they were the lowest of the low. And yet the angels brought the shepherds to look at the birth of the Messiah of Israel. And I just love the way that God writes the Bible. Herod never came out and had a look, but the lowest of the lower in society were privileged to see the birth of the Messiah. And he said, and they took that there. And by the way, when Herod heard the Magi say that the King of the Jews has been born, and he asked them, well, how long have you been following the star? And they said 2 years. That's from Chaldea all the way up to Haran and down slowly into Judea. And so that's when he sent the army out to Bethlehem to kill all of the male children 2 years and under. Do you understand? So he could get rid of the Messiah. And they actually found Joseph and Mary living in a house in Bethlehem, and this is 2 years later, and they gave him gold, frankincense and myrrh. And when Joseph knew that Herod had sent soldiers out to Bethlehem to kill male children, they took off and they lived in Egypt until the danger was over. Well, how did they survive in Egypt? With the gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Do you get it? Everything locks together beautifully if you just read the scriptures. Don't listen to people. Don't even listen to me. Listen to this, and if you have an opposition position, please bring it to me. You might teach me something. John MacArthur said, please don't ever elevate me into some kind of incredible intellect. He said, I'm not. I never was at school and I never am now, but I just read the scriptures. He did muck it up by saying, Jesus only died for those who believed in him. No, he died for the sins of the whole world. But it's only efficacious if you put your faith in him. That's the difference. And I love John. I'm sure he's getting reamed out by Peter and John and James and all that up there. You've got to do a remedial theology course when you finally get up there to be scrubbed clean, you know what I mean? Given that the outer wall of the court of the and the other one was in verse 16, and Jesus said he would not allow anyone to carry wares through the temple. And given that the outer wall of the court of the Gentiles is just so small you can just hop over it, anyone who was carrying something from one side of Jerusalem to the other was able to step over the little wall and walk through the court of Gentiles. And if they weren't even proselytes, they shouldn't have been there. And so Jesus stopped anyone carrying wares through the temple compound, the court of Gentiles. And Jesus was incensed at the irreverence of those people who just trampled across the court of Gentiles. And in verse 17, he taught them, saying, is it not written that my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of thieves? And I've got it here. Well, hello, modern Christianity. In verse 18, and the scribes and the chief priests heard it and sought how they might destroy him, for they feared him, because all of the people were astonished at his teaching. And so when even had come, he went out of the city, out of the temple, and back to Bethany. And you know what? As John said, on Palm Monday, they were throwing their cloaks down, throwing their palm leaves down, and all the rest of it. and they were saying, save us, Son of David, save us from the Romans, save us, save us. And what were they saying on Friday? Crucify him. Crucify him. It's amazing. I love human nature. To study human nature, and the best book for that is the Bible. Forget psychology, forget all the rest of it. Just read scriptures and you'll see the very best in person and you'll see the very worst in people. And so, Father, I just thank you now for this message here of Passion Week, and we're going to finish right through in the next couple of Sundays. And I am amazed at what we have learned here, and I always appreciate extremely high grade teaching, and I got some of that from John this week. It was quite fascinating, and so I did my research, Lord, just like you tell me to do, and I found that as that passage in Exodus 12 exactly laid it out as it was set. And so, Father, we know that everything that you have commanded always comes to pass, and it's always perfect, and it's always in the right time. And so, Father, I ask you now in this time, as we sang that wonderful song, Come Jesus Come, that's one of my prayers, because I can't tolerate what's happening in the world at the moment, and I just want Jesus to come and set it to rights. Take us up, clean us up, and then come back down with us after the tribulation and rule and reign in the millennial kingdom, Father. And I just ask this now, that you would bless everyone who's been here, come here today and heard that message. And Father, I just pray now that you are the Father of all of us. You are our Father, and I'm so grateful, Father, that my faith in Jesus has made me your child. And God's people said,